My daughter said she didn't need me anymore. Hi everyone! Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together, we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. There's a particular kind of silence that fills the spaces between a mother's heartbeats when her child tells her she's no longer needed. It's not the comfortable quiet of a sleeping house or the peaceful hush of snow falling outside your window. It's the hollow, echoing silence of a life suddenly stripped of its primary purpose, leaving you standing in the wreckage of everything you thought you knew about yourself. I learned about that silence on a Tuesday afternoon in March, sitting in my kitchen with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, staring at my phone after my daughter hung up on me. The words were still ringing in my ears. "Mom, I don't need you anymore. I need you to understand that and give me some space." 26 years. 26 years of my life devoted entirely to being her mother, and she didn't need me anymore. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, with the moment I first held her in my arms and felt the earth shift beneath my feet. Sarah was born on a rainy Thursday morning in October, after 18 hours of labor that felt like a lifetime and a heartbeat all at once. When the doctor placed her on my chest, still slippery and screaming, I looked down at her red, wrinkled face and felt something inside me reorganize itself completely. Every cell in my body suddenly had a new job: to love and protect this tiny, perfect creature who had just made me a mother. "She's beautiful," my then-husband Mark said, but I could barely hear him over the sound of my own heart breaking open with love so fierce it physically hurt. I was 24 then, young enough to think I knew what love was, old enough to be completely unprepared for the tsunami of feeling that crashed over me the moment I became Sarah's mother. Everything I had ever felt before, for Mark, for my parents, for friends and dreams and ambitions, suddenly seemed like practice emotions, pale rehearsals for this overwhelming, all-consuming love that left no room for anything else. Those early days blur together now, a haze of sleepless nights and endless feedings, and the constant, low-level panic of being responsible for someone so small and fragile. But what I remember most clearly is the way Sarah would curl her tiny fist around my finger while she nursed, how her eyes would find mine in the darkness at 3 a.m., the weight of her body relaxing into sleep against my chest. Mark tried to help, but he was working long hours at the law firm, trying to make partner, building what he called our future. I understood someone had to pay the bills, someone had to maintain the health insurance, someone had to think about practical things like college funds and retirement savings. My job was Sarah. My job was to make sure she had everything she needed, every minute of every day. I had been a high school English teacher before Sarah was born, with plans to eventually get my master's degree and maybe teach at the college level. I loved literature, loved the moment when a student's face would light up with understanding, loved the feeling of sharing something beautiful and meaningful with young minds hungry for knowledge. But after Sarah arrived, those plans seemed less important than making sure she reached every milestone, slept through the night, ate enough vegetables, felt secure and loved and confident in her place in the world. I took maternity leave, then extended it, then finally resigned when Sarah was 8 months old and still waking up 3 times a night calling for me. "Are you sure?" my principal asked when I submitted my resignation letter. "You're a gifted teacher, Rebecca. The kids love you, and you have such a bright future ahead of you." I looked down at Sarah, who was sleeping in her stroller next to my desk, her cheeks flushed pink and her tiny hand clutching a stuffed elephant I'd bought her the week before. "This is my future," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. Mark wasn't entirely happy about the loss of my income, but he could see how completely devoted I was to Sarah, how every decision I made was filtered through the lens of what would be best for her. And Sarah thrived under my constant attention. She was an early talker, a curious explorer, a happy baby who rarely cried, because I learned to anticipate her every need before she even knew she had it. I read to her for hours every day, surrounded by picture books about brave princesses and clever animals, and children who went on grand adventures. I sang lullabies while she fell asleep in my arms, made up silly songs about bath time and getting dressed and eating breakfast. I photographed everything: her first smile, her first tooth, her first steps across our living room into my waiting arms. When she was 2, I enrolled us in Mommy and Me classes at the community center. Music class on Mondays, art class on Wednesdays, story time at the library on Fridays. We had a routine, the two of us, a rhythm that revolved entirely around her schedule and her needs and her happiness. Other mothers at the classes would talk about needing breaks, about being grateful when their partners took the kids for a few hours so they could run errands or meet friends for coffee, or just sit in silence. I never understood that need. Being with Sarah wasn't draining, it was energizing. She was my favorite person, my most interesting companion, my greatest joy. "Don't you ever want to do something just for yourself?" my friend Lisa asked one afternoon when she stopped by for a visit. She was struggling with her own toddler, a willful little boy who seemed to fight her on everything from nap time to vegetables. "This is for myself," I replied, watching Sarah carefully stack blocks into a tower, her face serious with concentration. "There's nothing else I'd rather be doing." Lisa looked skeptical, but she didn't push the issue. None of my friends did, really. They seemed to understand that I had found my calling in motherhood, that Sarah wasn't just my daughter, but my vocation, my art, my masterpiece in progress. As Sarah grew older, my devotion only deepened. I volunteered in her preschool classroom, organized playdates and birthday parties, made elaborate Halloween costumes by hand because I wanted her to have something special and unique. When she started showing interest in dance, I researched every studio in town before enrolling her in the best program I could find. When she decided she didn't like dance and wanted to try soccer instead, I cheerfully switched gears, buying cleats and shin guards, and spending my Saturdays on sidelines cheering her on. Mark and I divorced when Sarah was 7. The marriage had been slowly dissolving for years. 2 people who had become strangers, sharing a house and a child, but little else. He accused me of being more interested in Sarah than in our relationship, and he wasn't wrong. I couldn't understand how he could want my attention when our daughter was right there, needing guidance and support and love. "She's going to be fine, Rebecca," he said during one of our final arguments. "You don't have to hover over her every second. You can have other interests, other relationships." "Why would I want other relationships when I have the most perfect one right here?" "Because Sarah is going to grow up and leave someday, and then what will you have?" I couldn't even process the question. Sarah leaving? She was 7 years old, still sleeping with a nightlight and asking me to check under her bed for monsters. The idea of her not needing me was so foreign, so impossible, that I dismissed it entirely. The divorce was amicable enough. Mark got weekend visits and Wednesday dinners. I got primary custody and the house, and Sarah got 2 parents who loved her even if they couldn't love each other. I told myself it was better this way. Now I could focus entirely on Sarah without having to split my attention between her needs and Mark's needs. Sarah handled the divorce better than I expected. She was resilient, adaptable, secure in the knowledge that both her parents adored her. If anything, she seemed to enjoy having me all to herself during the week, just the 2 of us in our cozy house with our established routines and our special traditions. We had movie nights every Friday, taking turns choosing films and making popcorn with elaborate toppings. Caramel for her, Parmesan for me. We had Sunday morning pancake breakfasts, where I would make the batter into shapes and letters, spelling out her name or making Mickey Mouse faces that delighted her every time. We had bedtime rituals that involved 3 stories, 2 songs, and a detailed discussion of her plans for the next day. I learned to braid her hair in intricate patterns for school picture day. I memorized her friends' names and their parents' phone numbers, and their favorite snacks for playdates. I knew which teachers she loved and which ones frustrated her, which subjects came easily, and which ones required extra help at home. When she was in 4th grade and struggling with math, I spent hours every evening at the kitchen table with her, working through homework problems and coming up with creative ways to make multiplication tables stick in her memory. When she was in 6th grade and dealing with friendship drama, I listened to every tear-filled recap of who said what to whom and offered gentle advice about kindness and standing up for herself. High school brought new challenges, boys and parties, and the gradual stretching of boundaries that comes with growing up. I tried to give her appropriate freedom while still being available for everything she needed: rides to school events, help with college application essays, a sympathetic ear when some boy broke her heart or when she didn't make the varsity team she'd hoped for. "You're so lucky your mom is so involved," her friends would tell her, and I glowed with pride. I had created exactly the kind of relationship with my daughter that I'd always dreamed of: close, supportive, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Sarah was accepted to her first-choice college, a prestigious university 5 hours away. I was proud, of course, thrilled that all my support and encouragement had helped her achieve this milestone, but I was also terrified. 5 hours away meant she wouldn't be coming home for dinner every night. She wouldn't be in her bedroom down the hall, safe and sound where I could check on her if I heard a strange noise in the night. "I'm going to miss you so much," I told her the night before we left for orientation, sitting on her bed surrounded by half-packed boxes and piles of clothes. "I'll miss you too, Mom," she said, but there was excitement in her voice, anticipation for the adventures ahead. She was ready to go, ready to start this new chapter of her life. I, on the other hand, was not ready to let her go. Move-in day was a blur of activity-carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs, arranging furniture in her tiny dorm room, meeting her roommate and her roommate's parents. Sarah was in her element, chatting with other freshmen, exploring the campus, signing up for activities and clubs. I kept finding excuses to linger, to organize one more drawer, or hang one more poster on the wall. "Mom," she finally said gently, "I think it's time for you to head home." The drive back to our empty house was one of the longest of my life. I cried for the first hour, then drove the rest of the way in the strange silence of a car that suddenly felt too big with only one person in it. The house felt different too. Too quiet, too still, too full of reminders of the girl who no longer lived there. Her bedroom, left exactly as she'd arranged it before leaving. The kitchen table set for 2 out of habit, even though there was only one of me to feed. The refrigerator covered with photos of her various milestones: first day of school, dance recitals, graduation, family vacations. I talked to Sarah almost every day during her first semester. Long phone calls where she told me about her classes and her professors and her new friends. She seemed happy, adjusted, thriving in her new environment. I was proud of her success, but privately devastated by how little she seemed to need me. "How are you doing, Mom?" she would ask, and I would give her cheerful updates about my job at the local bookstore I'd taken after the divorce, about the neighbors and the weather and the books I was reading. I didn't tell her about the evenings I spent wandering around the house, not sure what to do with myself, or the mornings I woke up and for a split second forgot she was gone before reality came crashing back. Thanksgiving was wonderful, 4 whole days of having her home, listening to her stories, cooking her favorite meals, pretending that nothing had changed. But then she left again, and the house felt even emptier than before. By spring break, I noticed subtle changes in our phone conversations. They were shorter, less frequent, often interrupted by roommates or friends or activities she needed to get to. "I should go, Mom," she'd say. "I'm meeting some friends for dinner." "Oh, of course," I'd reply. "Have fun, sweetie." But after I hung up, I'd sit staring at the phone, wondering when I'd become someone she needed to get off the phone to meet more interesting people. Sarah came home for the summer after her freshman year, but it wasn't the same. She had a job at a local restaurant, plans with high school friends who were also home from college, a boyfriend she'd met at school who visited for a week in July. She was pleasant and affectionate with me, but distracted, like someone who was just passing through rather than coming home. "It's normal," my friend Lisa assured me when I confided my concerns. "College changes them. They're becoming independent adults. You should be proud that you raised her to be confident and self-sufficient." I was proud. I was also lost. The pattern continued through her sophomore year, then junior year. Shorter phone calls, longer periods between visits, a gradual but unmistakable pulling away that left me feeling like I was constantly reaching for someone who was always just slightly out of my grasp. When she was a senior, Sarah started talking about her post-graduation plans. Graduate school, maybe, or a job in her field. Cities she was considering, apartments she might share with friends, adventures she wanted to have as a newly minted adult. "What about you, Mom?" she asked during one of our conversations. "What are your plans after I graduate? Any thoughts about dating again? Maybe traveling?" "Oh, I don't know," I said. "I suppose I'll figure something out." But the truth was, I hadn't given much thought to my own plans. For 22 years, my plans had been Sarah's plans. My schedule had been her schedule. My priorities had been her priorities. The idea of having independent goals and interests felt foreign, almost selfish. Sarah graduated summa cum laude with a degree in environmental science. I was bursting with pride as I watched her walk across that stage, remembering the little girl who used to curl up in my lap to read picture books about trees and flowers and all the creatures that lived in the forest. After graduation, she moved to Portland for a job with an environmental nonprofit. Portland 3,000 miles away from the small town where I'd raised her, where I was still living in the same house, working at the same bookstore, maintaining the same routines I'd had when she was in high school. We stayed in touch, of course. Phone calls every Sunday, texts throughout the week, care packages I sent filled with her favorite cookies and little items I thought she might need or enjoy. She seemed happy in Portland, excited about her work, enthusiastic about the hiking and the food scene and the friends she was making. Then, about a year after she'd moved, she called with news. "Mom, I have something to tell you. I'm seeing someone. His name is David, and he's wonderful. I think you'd really like him." David, a name I'd never heard before, attached to a person who was apparently important enough in her life to warrant an introduction over the phone. "Tell me about him," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic rather than hurt that this was the first I was hearing of someone who was clearly significant to her. David, it turned out, was a lawyer who worked for the same nonprofit. 3 years older than Sarah, originally from California, passionate about environmental law and social justice. They had been dating for 6 months. 6 months. My daughter had been in a relationship for 6 months and hadn't mentioned it until now. "I wanted to wait until I was sure it was serious," she explained. "But it is serious, Mom. Really serious. I think he might be the one." The one. My little girl talking about marriage and forever with someone I'd never met, someone whose existence I'd been unaware of until 5 minutes ago. I'm so happy for you, sweetheart," I said, and I meant it. If Sarah was happy, I was happy. That had always been my guiding principle, but I was also frightened in a way I couldn't quite articulate. David wasn't just a boyfriend, he was competition for Sarah's time and attention and emotional energy. He was someone whose needs might take precedence over mine, whose opinions might carry more weight than my advice. I met David 6 months later, when they came home for Christmas. He was everything Sarah had described: intelligent, kind, passionate about his work, clearly devoted to her. Watching them together, I could see why she had fallen in love with him. They had an easy chemistry, shared interests, the kind of partnership that looked like it could last a lifetime. "Your mom is great," David told me on their last night home. "Sarah talks about you all the time. She's so grateful for everything you've done for her." I smiled and thanked him, but part of me wondered, if Sarah was so grateful, Why did she seem to need me less and less? After they left, the house felt emptier than ever. Not just because Sarah was gone, but because I could feel her moving further away from me emotionally, building a life that had less and less room for the woman who had devoted herself entirely to raising her. They got engaged the following fall. Sarah called me, breathless with excitement, to share the news. "David proposed last night, Mom, at the place where we had our first date. It was perfect. I'm so happy I can barely think straight." "Congratulations, sweetheart," I said. "I'm thrilled for you." And I was thrilled. But I was also grieving something I couldn't name, the final official acknowledgement that Sarah's primary relationship was no longer with me. The wedding planning began immediately, and I threw myself into helping however I could. I researched venues and caterers, offered to pay for the flowers, spent hours on the phone with Sarah discussing color schemes and menu options and seating arrangements. "Mom, you don't have to do all this," she said during one particularly intense planning session. "David and I can handle most of it ourselves." "I want to help," I insisted. "This is my daughter's wedding. Of course I want to be involved." But even as I said it, I could hear something desperate in my own voice, a need to be useful, to be necessary, to prove that I still had a role in her life. The wedding was beautiful. Sarah looked radiant in a dress we'd chosen together during a mother-daughter shopping trip that had felt like old times, just the two of us, sharing opinions and laughing at the more ridiculous options. Walking her down the aisle, her father had moved to another state and had a complicated relationship with his new wife. I felt proud and heartbroken in equal measure. This was what I'd raised her for, I reminded myself. To be confident and independent and capable of building her own happy life. The fact that she no longer needed me wasn't a failure on my part. It was proof of my success as a mother. After the honeymoon, Sarah and David settled into married life in Portland. They bought a small house in a neighborhood Sarah described as perfect for when we start a family. They adopted a rescue dog named Luna. They hosted dinner parties and joined hiking groups and created the kind of rich, full life that any mother would want for her child. Our communication gradually became less frequent. The weekly Sunday calls became biweekly, then monthly. The texts became shorter, more focused on logistics and updates, rather than the long, meandering conversations we used to have about everything and nothing. "How are things with Mom?" I heard David ask Sarah during one of our phone calls, his voice carrying from somewhere in their kitchen. "Good," Sarah replied, but there was something dismissive in her tone, as if my life was too simple and predictable to warrant much discussion. I started to feel like I was becoming an obligation for her rather than a joy. Someone she called out of duty rather than desire. Someone she updated out of guilt rather than enthusiasm. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon in March, exactly 2 years after her wedding. I had called to tell her about a book I thought she'd enjoy, one I'd read about environmental activism that reminded me of her work. "That sounds interesting, Mom," she said, but I could hear the distraction in her voice, the sound of someone multitasking. "Are you busy? Should I call back later?" "No, it's fine. What else is going on?" It wasn't the question itself that hurt. It was the way she asked it, like someone going through a checklist, ticking off required interactions with family members. "Actually, I was thinking about planning a visit," I said. "It's been almost a year since I've seen your new house, and I'd love to meet Luna properly." "Oh," a pause. "Well, the next few months are pretty crazy for us. David's taking the bar exam in another state, and I'm starting a new project at work, and we're trying to plan a trip to see his parents." "I don't need anything elaborate," I said quickly. "I could just come for a weekend, help around the house, make you some meals while you're busy with everything else." Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Don't you have other things you want to do? Other people you want to spend time with? It just seems like you're always focused on me and what I'm doing, and I worry that you're not living your own life." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when was the last time you went on a trip that wasn't to visit me? When was the last time you mentioned a friend or a hobby or anything that was just yours? I opened my mouth to respond and realized I didn't have an answer. When had I last done something just for myself? When had I last talked to Sarah about anything other than her life, her job, her marriage, her plans? I'm living my life, I said defensively. I work, I read, I have my routines. But don't you want more than that? Don't you want adventures and relationships and goals that have nothing to do with me? You are my goal, I said, and immediately regretted it. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was gentle but firm. Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. I love you. I will always love you. You are an incredible mother, and I am grateful every day for everything you've done for me. But I don't need you anymore. Not the way you seem to need me to need you. The world tilted sideways. What? I have a husband now, and a career, and a life that I've built for myself. I'm happy, I'm successful, I'm surrounded by people who care about me, and a lot of that is because you gave me such a strong foundation, such confidence in myself. But now I need you to step back and let me live my adult life without feeling like I'm responsible for your happiness. I don't understand. I think you do. I think you know that you've been living through me instead of living your own life, and that's not fair to either of us. I can't be your whole world anymore, Mom. It's too much pressure, and it's not healthy. The phone felt heavy in my hand. So what are you saying? I'm saying I need some space. I need you to find other things to focus on, other relationships to invest in. I need our conversations to be about more than just me and my life. And I need you to stop trying to insert yourself into every decision I make, or every plan I have. I was just trying to be supportive. I know, but support looks different when your child is an adult. It looks like trusting them to handle their own problems, respecting their independence, having your own life to talk about when you call. I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air in a conversation that had veered completely away from anything I'd expected. How long? I managed to ask. How long what? How long have you felt this way? How long have you been not needing me? Sarah's sigh was audible through the phone. Mom, I've been an adult for almost 10 years. I've been financially independent, emotionally independent, living my own life and making my own decisions. But you've never seemed to notice or accept that. You keep treating me like I'm still your little girl who needs you to solve her problems and manage her life. Because you'll always be my little girl. No, Mom, I'll always be your daughter, but I haven't been your little girl for a very long time. We sat in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. I need to go, Sarah said finally. I have a work call in a few minutes, but I want you to think about what I've said, okay? I want you to consider what it would look like to build a life that doesn't revolve around me. Sarah, wait. I love you, Mom. I'll talk to you soon. The line went dead. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the phone in my hand, feeling like someone had just told me that the sun was actually the moon, or that water flows upward, or that everything I'd believed about the most fundamental aspect of my existence was wrong. She didn't need me anymore. The phrase echoed in my head as I moved through the rest of that day like a sleepwalker. I went to work at the bookstore, helped customers, processed returns, made small talk with my coworkers, all while feeling like I was watching someone else live my life. That evening, I sat in Sarah's old bedroom, looking at the photos and awards and mementos I'd carefully preserved exactly as she'd left them. Her childhood bed with the pink comforter we'd picked out together. Her bookshelf full of the stories we'd read together night after night. Her desk where I'd helped her with homework for years. This room was a shrine to the girl she used to be, a museum of our relationship frozen in time. And suddenly, I could see how pathetic that was. How desperately I'd been clinging to a version of Sarah that no longer existed, refusing to acknowledge the woman she'd become. The next few weeks passed in a fog of grief and confusion. I found myself starting to call Sarah multiple times, then stopping before the phone connected. I drafted texts I never sent, rehearsed conversations that would never happen. I was mourning something, but I wasn't sure what. The loss of my purpose? The end of the most important relationship in my life? The realization that everything I'd thought I was doing right had actually been wrong? My friend Lisa noticed my distress when I ran into her at the grocery store. "Rebecca, are you okay? You look terrible." I almost laughed at her honesty. "Sarah says she doesn't need me anymore." Lisa looked confused. "Well, of course she doesn't. She's a grown woman with her own life. Isn't that what we want for our kids?" "Is it?" "Of course it is. The goal is to raise them to be independent and happy, not to be dependent on us forever." "But then what's the point? What was the point of all those years of sacrifice and devotion if she's just going to grow up and not need me?" Lisa put her hand on my arm. "Honey, the point was to love her and raise her well. And you did that. She's successful and happy and capable of building her own life. That's not a failure. That's the biggest success a parent can have." "It doesn't feel like success. It feels like abandonment." "Because you made her your whole life instead of making her part of your life. She's not abandoning you. She's living the life you equipped her to live." That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went through my closet and found the box of journals I used to keep, back before Sarah was born, when I was still trying to figure out who I was and what I wanted from life. Reading my younger self's hopes and dreams and fears was like meeting a stranger. This woman wanted to travel, to write, to teach literature at the college level. She had opinions about books and politics and art that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs or preferences. She had her own identity, her own goals, her own sense of purpose. When had I stopped being her? When had I decided that being Sarah's mother was the only role I needed or wanted? I thought about Sarah's words. "Don't you want adventures and relationships and goals that have nothing to do with me?" The honest answer was that I didn't know. I'd been so focused on her needs for so long that I'd forgotten what my own needs felt like. But maybe it was time to find out. The next day, I called the community college and asked about their adult education programs. I'd always wanted to finish my master's degree, but there had never been time when Sarah was young. And then it had seemed too late, too impractical. "It's never too late," the admissions counselor assured me. "We have a lot of students who go back to school after their children are grown. It's actually quite common." I enrolled in 2 classes for the spring semester: Contemporary American Literature and Advanced Composition. For the first time in decades, I was doing something purely for myself, something that had nothing to do with Sarah's needs or preferences. The first day of class, I felt nervous in a way I hadn't experienced since high school. What if I was too old? What if I couldn't keep up with the younger students? What if I'd forgotten how to be a student rather than a parent? But as the professor began discussing the reading list and the requirements for our first essay, I felt something stirring inside me that I'd almost forgotten existed. Intellectual curiosity, the excitement of engaging with ideas and texts and perspectives that challenged me to think in new ways. I threw myself into my coursework with an enthusiasm that surprised me. I read voraciously, wrote thoughtful papers, participated in class discussions with the kind of passion I'd once reserved for advocating for Sarah's needs at school conferences. My classmates were a diverse group, some recent high school graduates, some career changers like me, some retirees pursuing interests they'd never had time for. I found myself making friends, something I realized I hadn't done in years. "Want to grab coffee after class?" asked a woman named Margaret, who was about my age and working on a degree in social work. Coffee after class led to study sessions, which led to long conversations about books and life and the strange experience of rediscovering yourself after years of being defined primarily by your relationship to other people. I was a mother first for so long that I forgot I was anything else, I confided to Margaret one afternoon. "I did the same thing," she replied. "Spent 30 years being defined as someone's wife and someone's mother. Then my husband died, and my kids moved across the country, and I had to figure out who I was underneath all those roles. How did you do it? One day at a time, one class at a time, one friendship at a time. It's scary, but also kind of exciting, isn't it? Like being reborn. I hadn't called Sarah in 3 weeks, the longest we'd gone without talking since she'd left for college. I knew I should reach out, should try to repair whatever damage had been done by our last conversation, but I didn't know what to say. How do you apologize for loving someone too much? How do you explain that you're finally trying to become the person she needed you to be all along? Instead, I focused on my classes, my new friendships, the gradual process of remembering who I used to be and figuring out who I wanted to become. I joined a book club at the local library. I started volunteering at a literacy program for adults. I took a weekend trip to visit museums in a nearby city, something I'd always wanted to do but had never made time for. Each new experience felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd lost or forgotten. I was still Sarah's mother. I would always be Sarah's mother, but I was also Rebecca, a woman with her own interests and goals and relationships. Spring turned to summer, and I was surprised to realize that I was happy. Not the intense, all-consuming joy I'd felt when Sarah was small and needed me for everything, but a quieter, more sustainable kind of contentment. I liked my life. I liked the person I was becoming. When Sarah called in early July, I almost didn't recognize her number. It had been 2 months since our last conversation. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice tentative. "How are you?" "I'm good," I said, and realized I meant it. "Really good. How are you?" I'm okay. I've been thinking about you a lot, about our last conversation. I was pretty harsh, and I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings." "You weren't harsh. You were honest, and I needed to hear it." "Still, I could have said it more kindly." "Maybe, but sometimes the truth needs to be said clearly, even if it's uncomfortable." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "You sound different." "Do I? Different how?" "I don't know. Calmer, maybe. More yourself." I laughed. "I'm trying to figure out who myself is. It's been an interesting journey." "What do you mean?" For the first time in our relationship, I found myself talking to Sarah about my own life rather than asking about hers. I told her about my classes, my new friends, the volunteer work I'd started. I talked about the books I was reading, the essays I was writing, the plans I was making for the fall semester. "Mom, that's amazing," Sarah said, and I could hear genuine excitement in her voice. "I'm so proud of you for going back to school. It's terrifying and wonderful at the same time. I'd forgotten how much I love learning." "What made you decide to do it?" I considered the question carefully. "You did, actually. When you told me I needed to find my own life, my own goals, my own adventures. It took me a while to understand what that meant, but I think I'm finally figuring it out." "I'm glad. I was worried that I'd been too brutal, that I'd damaged our relationship permanently." "You didn't damage anything. You helped me see something I'd been blind to for years. I'd lost myself in being your mother, and that wasn't fair to either of us." "I love that you were such a devoted mother," Sarah said softly. "I hope you know that. Everything you did for me, all the love and support and sacrifice it made me who I am today. But I also want you to be happy and fulfilled as a person, not just as my mom." "I'm learning how to be both," I said. "It's harder than I expected, but also more rewarding." "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret it? All those years of putting me first?" I thought about the question, really considered it. Did I regret the bedtime stories, and the homemade Halloween costumes, and the hours spent helping with homework? Did I regret the dance recitals and soccer games, and late-night conversations about friendship drama? "No," I said finally. "I don't regret loving you completely. I don't regret being present for your childhood, for being the kind of mother who was always available when you needed me. But I do regret losing myself in the process. I regret not showing you what it looks like for a woman to have her own dreams, and pursue them alongside being a mother. You're showing me now? I suppose I am. We talked for another hour, and it was different from any conversation we'd had in years. We talked about books we were both reading, about current events, about my classes and her work, and David's recent promotion. For the first time, it felt like a conversation between two adults rather than a mother checking in on her child. When we finally said goodbye, I felt something I hadn't experienced in our relationship for years: anticipation for our next conversation, rather than anxiety about when she would call again. That fall, I applied to transfer to the state university to finish my bachelor's degree and then pursue the master's in literature I'd abandoned decades earlier. At 52, I was going to be a full-time college student again. "Are you sure about this?" Margaret asked when I told her about my plans. "It's a big commitment." "I'm terrified," I admitted. "But I think that might be a good sign. When was the last time I did something that scared me? When was the last time I took a risk that was just for me?" My first day on the university campus, I felt ancient walking among all the 18-year-olds with their backpacks and their confident energy. But I also felt alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. My professors were encouraging, my classmates were welcoming, and I discovered that my years of reading and thinking and living had given me perspectives that enriched class discussions in ways my younger self never could have managed. "You bring such insight to these texts," my Victorian literature professor told me after class one day. "Have you considered graduate school?" Graduate school? The dream I'd set aside when Sarah was born, that I'd convinced myself was too late to pursue. "I have," I admitted, "but I'm not sure I'm young enough to start over." "Age is just experience in disguise," she said. "The best graduate students aren't necessarily the youngest ones." I started researching PhD programs in literature, something I'd never dared to do when Sarah was young and needed so much of my attention and energy. The idea of spending years focused on research and writing and teaching felt both impossible and inevitable. Sarah called while I was working on my graduate school applications. "Mom, I have news," she said, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. "Good news, I hope?" "The best news. David and I are having a baby." My first instinct was joy, pure and immediate. My daughter was going to be a mother. I was going to be a grandmother. The cycle was beginning again, and I felt the familiar surge of love and anticipation that came with new babies and new possibilities. My second instinct was panic. Would Sarah expect me to drop everything and help with the baby? Would she need me to move to Portland to provide the kind of constant support I'd craved from my own mother, but never received? Would this new grandchild become my new purpose, my new identity? "Mom, are you there?" "I'm here," I said quickly. I'm so happy for you, sweetheart. When are you due?" "April. We just found out last week, but we couldn't wait to tell you." "How are you feeling? Are you excited? Nervous?" "All of the above. Mostly excited. David is already reading every parenting book he can find, and I keep catching myself putting my hand on my belly, even though there's nothing to feel yet." I remembered that feeling, the wonder and anticipation of carrying new life, the way every day brought new awareness of the miracle happening inside your body. "It's the most incredible experience," I told her. "Being pregnant, becoming a mother, there's nothing like it." "I keep thinking about all the things you did for me when I was little," Sarah said. "All the ways you made my childhood magical. I hope I can do the same for this baby." "You will. You'll be an amazing mother." "Will you? Would you want to come visit after the baby is born?" "Not immediately, but maybe when we're settled. I'd love for you to meet your grandchild." There it was. The invitation I'd been simultaneously hoping for and dreading. "Of course," I said. "I'd love to meet the baby. But Sarah, I need you to know that I'm not the same person I was when you were little. I can't be the kind of grandmother who drops everything to provide constant help and support." I wouldn't expect you to. I have my own life now, my own commitments and goals. I'm applying to PhD programs. I might be moving, starting a new career. I want to be part of this baby's life, but not at the expense of the life I'm finally building for myself. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Mom, that's exactly the kind of grandmother I'd want for my child. Someone who has her own passions and interests and sense of purpose. Someone who models what it looks like to be a whole person, not just someone defined by their relationships to other people. I felt something release in my chest, a tension I hadn't realized I was carrying. Really? Really. I want my child to have a grandmother who takes risks and pursues dreams and lives a full life. I want them to see that being devoted to your family doesn't mean disappearing into your family. I love you, I said, meaning it in a different way than I'd ever meant it before. Not the desperate, all-consuming love that had defined my early motherhood, but something steadier, more sustainable. Love that honored both of us as separate, complete people who chose to remain connected. I love you too, Mom, and I'm so proud of the woman you're becoming. 6 months later, I was accepted into a PhD program at a university 800 miles away from my hometown. The acceptance letter arrived on the same day Sarah sent me her first ultrasound photo, and I stared at both pieces of paper, marveling at the timing. A new beginning for me, a new beginning for her. 2 women in the same family, both brave enough to start fresh, both strong enough to pursue dreams that scared them. I called Sarah to tell her about the acceptance. Mom, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you. It means I'll be even farther away when the baby comes. It also means you'll be living your own life, pursuing your own dreams. That's worth more than geographical proximity. I moved that summer, driving across 3 states with my car packed full of books and clothes, and the few mementos I couldn't bear to leave behind. The photo of Sarah as a baby, taking her first steps into my waiting arms. A drawing she'd made me in 2nd grade, showing the 2 of us holding hands. Her high school graduation photo, proud and beautiful in her cap and gown. I was keeping the memories, the love, the gratitude for all those years of being her mother. But I was also letting go of the need to be everything to her, to define myself entirely through her needs and her life. My new apartment was small but bright, with a view of the campus where I'd be taking classes and teaching undergraduates. I hung my favorite photos on the walls, arranged my books on shelves, set up a desk where I would write my dissertation on motherhood in Victorian literature. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was going to spend the next several years studying how 19th century women writers explored the tension between individual identity and maternal devotion, the same tension I'd been living out in my own life. Sarah's baby was born on a rainy morning in April, just as the cherry trees on campus were blooming outside my apartment window. She called me from the hospital, exhausted and exhilarated. Mom, she's here! Emma Rose, 7 pounds, 2 ounces, and absolutely perfect. Emma. She'd named her daughter Emma, the same name I'd almost given Sarah before deciding it was too old-fashioned. How are you feeling? I asked. Like I've been hit by a truck and won in the lottery at the same time. She's so tiny, Mom, but so strong. And when she looks at me, God, I had no idea it was possible to love someone this much. I smiled, remembering that feeling, that moment when you realize your heart is suddenly living outside your body. Welcome to motherhood, sweetheart. I keep thinking about everything you gave up for me, everything you sacrificed, and I'm finally starting to understand what that meant. Don't sacrifice everything, I said gently. Love her completely. Be present for her. Give her everything she needs to grow up strong and confident and kind. But don't disappear into motherhood the way I did. She needs you to be a whole person, not just her mother. I'll try to remember that. I visited when Emma was 3 months old, flying to Portland for a long weekend that felt like a gift to all 3 generations of women in our family. I held my granddaughter and marveled at her tiny fingers and serious expressions, but I also enjoyed adult conversations with Sarah and David about books and politics and their plans for the future. "You seem so content," Sarah observed on my last night there, watching me rock Emma to sleep. "I am content. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I'm genuinely happy with my life." What's different? I thought about the question while Emma dozed in my arms. This perfect little person who carried my genes and Sarah's hopes and David's determination to make the world a better place. "I'm not waiting for my life to begin anymore," I said finally. "I'm not defining my worth by how much other people need me. I'm living my own life, pursuing my own goals, building relationships based on choice rather than obligation." "And you don't miss it? The intensity of being someone's whole world?" "Sometimes," I admitted. There was something intoxicating about being so completely necessary to another person. But it wasn't sustainable, and it wasn't fair to either of us. You needed to grow up and become independent, and I needed to remember that I existed as more than just your mother. Sarah smiled, looking down at her sleeping daughter. "I want to do better. I want to love her fiercely, but not lose myself in the process." "You will. You're already doing better than I did at your age, just by being aware of the balance." As I flew home the next day, looking down at the landscape passing beneath the airplane, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The devastating phone call that had shattered my understanding of myself, the months of grief and confusion that followed, the slow process of rebuilding my identity from the ground up. Sarah had been right to tell me she didn't need me anymore. Not because she didn't love me, but because she loved me enough to want me to find my own life, my own purpose, my own happiness that didn't depend entirely on her well-being. That conversation had felt like the end of the world at the time, but it had actually been the beginning of a new world, one where I could be both Sarah's mother and Rebecca, the graduate student, both Emma's grandmother and a woman with her own dreams and ambitions. 3 years later, I defended my dissertation on maternal identity in Victorian women's literature. Sarah and David came to my defense, bringing 2-year-old Emma with them. Watching my daughter hold my granddaughter while I discussed my research with my committee members, I felt a completeness I'd never experienced before. This was what balance looked like. This was what it meant to be a mother and a person, to love your family completely while still maintaining your own identity and pursuing your own goals. After the defense, we went out for dinner to celebrate. Emma sat in her high chair, making a joyful mess with her food, while the adults talked about my future career prospects and Sarah's work and David's latest environmental case. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Sarah said as we were leaving the restaurant. "Not just for finishing your PhD, but for becoming the person you were always meant to be." "Thank you for pushing me to find her," I replied. "That phone call 3 years ago, it was the hardest conversation we'd ever had, but it was also the most important one. I was terrified you'd never forgive me for being so blunt. I was terrified you'd never need me again in any capacity. But I've learned that being needed and being loved are different things. You may not need me to manage your life anymore, but you still love me, and I still love you. That's enough. That's everything." We hugged goodbye at the airport, 3 generations of strong women who had learned how to love each other without losing themselves in the process. Flying home to start my new job as an assistant professor of literature, I thought about the girl I'd been at 24, holding my newborn daughter and believing that being her mother was all I'd ever need to be. That young woman had loved Sarah with everything she had, but she'd made the mistake of thinking that complete devotion required complete self-sacrifice. Now I knew better. The greatest gift I could give my daughter and my granddaughter wasn't my constant availability or my willingness to disappear into their needs. The greatest gift was showing them what it looked like to be a woman who loved her family fiercely while also loving herself enough to pursue her own dreams. At 55, I was finally living the life I'd abandoned at 24. I had a career I was passionate about, friends who knew me as more than someone's mother, goals that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs or expectations. I was still Sarah's mother, and I would be for the rest of my life. But I was also Dr. Rebecca now, a woman who had learned that the most profound act of motherhood might be teaching your children that they don't need to sacrifice themselves to love someone completely. The last time Sarah called, she had news. "Mom, I'm pregnant again." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "Good. Tired, but good. And this time, I'm going to handle things differently. I'm not going to give up everything for this baby. I'm going to love them completely. But I'm also going to keep working, keep pursuing my own interests, keep being Sarah as well as being someone's mother." That sounds perfect. I learned that from you, you know. Not from the way you raised me, but from the way you rebuilt your life after I told you I didn't need you anymore. You showed me what it looks like to be devoted to your family without disappearing into them. I smiled, looking out my office window at the students walking across campus, young people full of dreams and potential, just as I'd been once upon a time. I love you, Sarah. I love you too, Mom. And thank you. For what? For finally becoming yourself, for showing me that it's possible to be an amazing mother and an amazing woman at the same time. After we hung up, I sat in my office surrounded by my books and my research and the life I'd built for myself, feeling grateful for the daughter who had loved me enough to set me free. She didn't need me anymore, and that was the most beautiful gift she'd ever given me.